Wabarakatuh, and a very good afternoon to all. I hope everyone is in great health. Before we proceed with today's event, please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Rosa, and I'm your host for today's event. Welcome to Nama Talk. Just a brief about Nama Talk to those who have not heard about Nama Talk before. Okay, Nama Talk is actually another great step ahead for Nama Foundation in creating a platform to our existing and potential partners from various organizations and agencies to share their experiences and expose themselves to the philanthropic world. With this in mind, we believe this initiative will give a positive impact in giving back to the society and communities. That's a little bit about Nama Talk and its objective. Okay, without further ado, let me introduce and welcome our CEO, Dr. Saleh Mubarak Baziat, to give his welcoming speech. So, welcome, Dr. Saleh.
Okay, thank you, Rosa. Do you hear me, guys? Okay, بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We welcome you, warm welcome for our Nama Talk session today. I think it is the third or the fourth virtual session of Nama Talk, thanks to the pandemic that made us more familiar and more knowledgeable with the technology. As you know, Nama Talk has been an initiative by Nama Foundation for the last 2 years, whereby we have been conducting physical sessions in our office to explore and to network among philanthropy stakeholders, either be experts, individuals, academicians, organizations, companies, government agencies, to come together and discuss issues of the date, to provide and to exchange ideas to ensure that we learn from each other and we spread the knowledge of charity. And today's event actually is part of that series, which has been done for the last few years. Nama Foundation is a grant-making international organization based in Malaysia since 2004. And we have been working in few countries for the last almost 1.5 decades, with the main focus on education as well as socio-economic empowerment, which we call it third sector empowerment, with the ultimate goal to provide inclusive and quality education for schools, students, and all stakeholders in the educational institutions. For the NGOs, we are also hoping and working, striving hard to ensure that we obtain a financial and organizational sustainability for the NGOs in the countries where we operate, specifically Tanzania, Indonesia, and Kyrgyzstan, to ensure those organizations are having good governance practices, good human capital, as well as sufficient financial resources to manage their activities on the ground. Nama Talk today is Doing Good Never Dies, which is a very good title indeed, as we are all working and trying to do good at organizational and individual level, locally and globally, and maximize Asia potential. And this actually the soul and the core business of Nama Foundation is to always maximize the impact of our grants wherever we operate. I don't want to take much of your time. I would like to welcome our distinguished speakers, Noor Farini Dang, CEO and co-founder of MyHarapan, Mr. Ahmed Faris Amir, CEO of Impact Malaysia, Chan Song Singh, CEO of TIC for Malaysia, Farida Halina Zairi, founder of Coffee for Good, Ms. Elaine Lokman, director and co-founder of Asia Ata Plus, Mivish Mumtaz Ahmed, director of Research Center for Asia Philanthropy and Society, CAPS, and Ruth Shapiro, co-founder and CEO of Center for Asian Philanthropy and Society, CAPS as well. We have brought you a very unique, outstanding speakers today to share their experiences and extend their knowledge to their colleagues from Malaysia and globally. Today we are going live for Facebook. So we have a lot of audiences from different countries, different states who are interested in this unique topic. And I encourage all the audiences to make use of this session and enrich it with a lot of questions, inquiries for us to really have a good and better conclusion of today's session. I welcome again all our distinguished speakers. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Saleh, for the inspiring welcoming speech. Okay, and now without further ado, let me introduce our lovely moderator for today, Ms. Nur Farini Daing, the CEO and co-founder of MyHarapan, and our wonderful sign language interpreter, Ms. Goh Suleng from the Malaysia Federation of the Deaf, in short is MFD. Okay, here you go. The session is all yours, Nini. Bye-bye.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone. I'm going to quickly just start the ball rolling by first ensuring a couple of housekeeping rules. I hope that now in this day and age where the norm has changed, and it's been super exciting these past few days as far as Malaysia is concerned. A lot of added excitement and drama, which I feel can be subject to this discussion today. What we're going to do is, for the agenda, we're going to start first with a presentation by CAPS to really understand how the indexes, if we don't know, we won't be able to fully, without use, it's not something that we can actually benefit from. So without understanding, I feel that it's difficult to move forward with. CAPS, as we've been privileged to know them over the years through several research engagements, and I feel that with the DGI index, which includes 18 economies, will prove extremely useful for us to, it provides us with the sort of best practices that is needed for ASEA, that is unique to ASEA. So without further ado, let me also present first Dr. Ruth Shapiro, who is the co-founder and the CEO of CAPS, Center for Asian Philanthropy and Society. She has such an illustrious career, and but I'm quite sure you can read all of this. You should read all her books. Sorry, hold on. I have a kid running around with me right now. But I feel that at most times she's a lot younger than I am. And I think it's that the sort of vitality and youthfulness that is really required in the third sector, and being able to get that from her is super inspiring. Okay. Secondly, as presenting with her is Mevesh. Mevesh is the Director of Research at CAPS, and she was quite the driving force behind the innovative projects such as the Doing Good Index. So without further ado, there's also a lot of stories with Mevesh, and we have a lot of fun with CAPS. So apart from the research serious exterior, they're absolutely fun. So please, the floor is yours now, Mevesh, Ruth and Mevesh.
Well, thank you very much, Nini, for that lovely introduction. Thank you, NAMA Foundation, for hosting us and for this talk. I love the title, Doing Good Never Dies, nor does it seem to take a break for tumultuous events happening locally and globally. We're watching the world change around us, hopefully for the better all around. And in that way, I think the Doing Good Index comes at a very helpful time, because we do believe that we're at a little bit of a fork in the road in terms of our global community and our local communities, in terms of how we're going to go forward, how we're going to work together, how we're going to be more inclusive, how we're going to achieve more equity, more sustainability. And the Doing Good Index helps us to think about that. Let me just say a word about CAPS, the Center for Asian Philanthropy and Society. We are a research and advisory nonprofit organization based in Hong Kong, but actually don't turn the slide yet. I'll tell you when. We're based in Hong Kong, but we work across Asia in 18 economies, 16 countries, including, of course, Malaysia, plus Hong Kong and Taiwan. We do 3 kinds of research: policy research, applied research, and bespoke or commissioned research. The Doing Good Index is really our flagship policy piece, because it primarily focuses on government, although not only, and we'll talk about that as we go through this presentation. So this is the second iteration of the Doing Good Index. We have had the great fortune of working with My Harapan in both iterations and being our partner on the ground in Malaysia for this work. For those of you who have gone through filling out the survey for our index, I thank you. I thank you. We couldn't do this without social delivery organizations, nonprofits, and social enterprises taking the time to fill out our survey and give us the kind of robust data we need in order to present back to you today our findings. So what is the Doing Good Index? And don't move the slide yet. It's really an effort to look at factors that enable or hinder the giving and receiving of all types of private social investment. So what allows philanthropy, CSR, impact investing to flow, and what holds it back? That's what we want to understand. We want to understand how much in each of these economies really people with money are giving it, and people who need money are receiving it. Money to do good things, money to do good. We started this, as I said, the first one was in 2018, and now this is 2020. So now we can go to the next slide. As we know, the world is facing unprecedented challenges. And in fact, the term unprecedented is being used an unprecedented number of times. We are all struggling to understand what the COVID-19 pandemic means, how to deal with it, and how to deal with the economic, educational, and health-related fallout that it creates. However, during these very difficult times, next slide. Next slide. Can you go to the next slide? Yes. The social sector has risen to the occasion. And we all know of the social sector. And when I say social sector, I'm talking about nonprofits, social enterprises, philanthropy, CSR, has all stepped up to deal with the crisis that we face. The social sector has provided food aid, healthcare, medical devices, medical services, emergency grants and loan, and has partnered with government to really address the immediate concerns faced by everyone around the world. But at the same time, the social sector has continued or tried to continue the work that it does, addressing the needs of the most vulnerable and helping our societies become healthier, cleaner, more sustainable, more equitable. And better places to live for all of us. Next slide.
Sorry, can I just quickly interrupt to request Shalini to make this full screen, the presentation, Shalini, and then you can use your arrows to control, to go from one slide to the next. Thank you.
Great, thank you. See, Mevesh is not just a pretty face, she's also technically capable.
If only
Anyway.
I could that.
So why do we do the Doing Good Index? We know that there are factors that really hinder the flow of money. And one of them that we're going to discuss at length throughout this study, throughout this presentation, is a profound trust deficit with the social sector, by the social sector, that is really serving to cause all of us not to punch below our weight, to not do as much as we can, and to hold back funding. We know that in the United States, philanthropy is equivalent to 2% of the GDP of that country. What is 2% of the GDP of the 18 economies included in the Doing Good Index mean? That is $587 billion that could be unleashed if we could only get to that 2%. $587 billion is 12 times the amount of foreign aid that flows into Asia, and a third of the annual cost of achieving the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, by 2030. So it's a lot of money, and it's money that there's no reason to think cannot be unleashed in Asia today. How can we do it? Next slide, please. The Doing Good Index gives us 3 sets of tools to think about how to allow this money to flow. 1, tools that align incentives around doing good, and we're going to give you examples of each of these 3 during the presentation. 2, tools that allow us to mitigate the trust deficit, which is so much harming our ability to work together and collaborate. And 3, tools and factors and strategies that maximize private social investment flowing to the sector. So what is the Doing Good Index? Next slide. It's a survey that, as I said, was carried out in 18 economies through our partnerships with important partners like MyHarapan. And I just might add that Nini said that it's fun to work with us. I have to say that it is great fun to work with MyHarapan, and they are among the most enthusiastic, exuberant, and delightful of our partners. With the help of our partners, we surveyed 2,189 social delivery organizations. So those are nonprofits and social enterprises on the front lines of doing good. And we interviewed 145 experts. In this year's Doing Good Index, we also wrote 18 economy profiles, which really provide an overview of what is the state of play of the social sector in each of these economies. The Doing Good Index is made up of 4 tranches of indicators, 4 sets of indicators. 3 of them have to do with government. So regulations account for efficiency, how efficient is the sector, what holds back or regulates the flow of funds. Regulations can really help with accountability and transparency, which are key to mitigating the trust deficit. And regulations can help or hinder communication. Tax and fiscal policies are incentives for donors to give and for recipients in terms of tax-exempt organizations. Tax and fiscal policies are also a very important signaling mechanism for government, as are regulations, to show their support for the sector. Lastly, for government is procurement. The government can show how important the sector is by working with it, contracting with it, and legitimizing it. And we're going to talk about those 3 government areas. We're also going to talk about ecosystem factors. And those are essentially, how much does the society embrace philanthropy, CSR, giving back, the nonprofit sector, the social enterprise sector. What is the public perception of these types of organizations and activities? What types of recognition are there? How is talent really fostered and how does it flourish? And what are good governance principles? And together, these four sets of indicators really give us an understanding of how societies are working together with the social sector. So the headline really, besides how much we could be doing, is the next slide. Next slide. Which is the index itself. Now, let me just say that the index is in alphabetical order within a cluster. These are not in league tables. So we have those that are not doing enough, those that are doing okay. Malaysia is in this category, those that are doing better, and those that are doing well. Let me just say that this scale is on a scale of 5, and even the ones doing well, Singapore and Taiwan, have not passed a 4. So there's still room to improve for everyone. Malaysia, you can see, actually went down. It was doing better the first time we did this, and now it's doing okay. We're going to share why things have changed in Malaysia and what we need to do to bring it back up. With that, I'm going to ask you to go to the next slide and hand over to my colleague, Mavish Mumtaz Ahmed.
Thanks very much, Ruth. Sorry. All right, so that was a great overview of what the Doing Good Index is and why we did this. But let's now zoom into Malaysia. As Ruth mentioned, Malaysia was doing better last time in 2018, but has dropped down to doing okay. And we want to discuss why that is, as well as what Malaysia can do to improve its performance. So before sharing some of the details, detailed data and insights that we found through our survey, let's zoom out a little bit and talk about what Malaysia has actually been doing well. We know that over the last few decades, Malaysia has been a success story. There has been great progress. Malaysia has now become a high middle income country. Income inequality exists, but it is one of the few countries in the world where it is actually declining. And more recently, it seemed as if the government was beginning to see the social sector's role in building a prosperous Malaysia together with the corporate sector and the public sector. So Malaysia has largely been on the right track, and it's overall been a positive story. But there are headwinds, and these headwinds are worth looking at and exploring and guarding against. We know also that in the last few years, there has been a great deal of political uncertainty in Malaysia. And if the news from this morning just continues that, and that's something that has an impact not only on the overall economy and society, but also the way that the social sector can thrive and flourish in Malaysia. We also know that economic growth was slowing down even before COVID, and COVID threatens to accelerate that. And finally, we know that the resources that were available to meet social needs in Malaysia and the rest of the world, they were flowing into Asia from abroad in the form of foreign funding, were declining before COVID. And again, COVID is going to further accelerate that. So really, the time for unleashing domestic private social investment in the form of philanthropy, CSR, and impact investing is really now. It's really quite urgent that these homegrown resources be unleashed and also be used more strategically and impactfully. And this is why the Doing Good Index is important right now, because it is showing how some of this can actually be achieved. There are three steps that Malaysia can take in moving back from doing okay to doing better. The first one is improving regulations and the governance infrastructure that governs the social sector. The second one is to improve incentives for giving. And the third one is to have greater engagement by government. So let's look at the first one of these and move on to the next slide. Let's look at how Malaysia can actually improve regulations and the governance infrastructure. Now, regulations, as Ruth mentioned, is one of the 4 critical pillars of the Doing Good Index. And we care about regulations because they help build transparency and accountability in the sector. therefore helping to mitigate the trust deficit, which is one of the big roadblocks in private resources flowing to social sector organizations. It also helps to determine how easy or difficult it is for those that want to work to meet social needs to actually do their work. How efficient is it for a nonprofit organization or a social enterprise to set up? And we see actually Malaysia does quite well here. According to experts that were interviewed for the Doing Good Index, aspiring nonprofits actually only need one clearance to set up. Also, they're able to set up in only 5 days, which is about the fastest time in all of Asia. And as you can see, the Asia average is 3 months. Malaysia is only 5 days. So it's very quick and easy to set up as a social delivery organization in Malaysia. But then from that point on, it can take 2 years to actually get tax exempt status. And that injects some inefficiency into the system where the resources that should be going towards doing good are also being taxed. So that's here in creating an efficient environment for social service delivery, Malaysia presents a bit of a mixed bag. An integral part of effective regulations that build trust and transparency are that they are complied with, and how easy they are to understand is again important. So when we asked social delivery organizations in Malaysia, how easy are laws and regulations pertaining to the social sector to understand, about half of them said yes, which is far greater than the Asia average of around 20%. But let's not forget that that means that 60% still find it hard. If laws and regulations are hard to understand, then they're also hard to comply with. And that does not bode well for building trust in the system. We also see that most of our survey respondents, most social delivery organizations felt that laws were also not always enforced. So there's a gap here that Malaysia can bridge in order to build donors' trust in this sector. Let's go to the next slide and look at the final piece of regulations, which are laws and rules that help build transparency and accountability directly. Now, 15 of the 18 economies that we look at help build transparency by requiring nonprofits and social delivery organizations to submit and file annual reports. Malaysia is not one of them. So an easy step for Malaysia to take would be to mandate that nonprofit organizations, just as with listed companies, do share their annual reports with the government. And in fact, Malaysian social sector does not have to wait for the government to take this step. We, through the Doing Good Index, are also really encouraging social sector organizations to take matters into their own hands. We see this happening in some economies where nonprofits are choosing to publish their annual reports online on their own websites, or we are seeing, as in the case of Philippines or Pakistan, transparency and accountability organizations being voluntarily set up from within the social sector, not waiting for laws and regulations to put those in place. So there, again, there's Malaysia's part of the way there in building transparency, but it can do more. And the final part of building trust is accountability. And one of the ways in which nonprofits can be held accountable is that they have oversight. And that oversight usually comes through boards of governance. And here we find that Malaysia is one of only 3 economies in Asia that does not mandate that a nonprofit organization have a board of governance. So that's one step that can be taken. And therefore, it's no surprise that in Malaysia, less than 2/3 of nonprofits actually have boards of governance, compared to almost 90% in Asia. Let's go to the next slide and look at the second set of recommendations that the Doing Good Index comes up with to help Malaysia set up a more enabling and supportive environment for social service delivery. Incentives for giving. We know that foreign funding was declining in Asia even before COVID hit. 10 out of the 18 economies that we cover, including Malaysia, said that foreign funding towards the social sector was decreasing. We also know that COVID is, if anything, going to accelerate that trend, as there is pressure on all governments all over the world to keep homegrown resources within the country and use them for meeting that country's needs. So what were social delivery organizations doing in the wake of this decline in foreign funding? we see that across Asia, more than 80% were turning to domestic donors. So this demand for domestic resources, this need for domestic resources was already there. And if anything, that's going to increase. This is also one of the reasons that we see that in more Malaysian organizations were turning to crowdfunding than the Asian average. Almost half, around 40%, were crowdfunding from local donors. And in fact, I think almost 70% said that they intend to crowdfund. So we're seeing Malaysian social delivery organizations turning towards local donors. Some of them are leveraging technology by turning to crowdfunding. But let's see what else can be done to make these homegrown resources available to them. Let's look at the next slide, please. Now, the government can play a bigger role here than it has been doing. We know through My Harapan and the experts that we spoke to that there are recent policy initiatives that the government has taken that hint at an increase in the willingness to work with social sector organizations to reduce poverty, to support marginalized communities, etc., and to build trust. But one of the most powerful tools that government has in order to incentivize private giving to the social sector is actually underutilized in Malaysia. And those are tax and fiscal incentives. So it's great that tax deductions, tax incentives are in place. There are two reasons that tax incentives are very important in pulling more investment, social investment into the sector. One is that when a tax deduction is offered, there's an actual effect of making people want to give more. But the other tool is quite unique to Asia compared to other parts of the world, which is that in Asia, government signaling really matters. So when an Asian government and the Malaysian government signals its support for giving by putting in place tax deductions, companies and individuals and philanthropists take note and they are more likely to give. So we see that Malaysia offers 100% rates of tax deduction, but the effect, the full effect of these tax deductions is dampened because the amount of income that is eligible for these is limited to 7 to 15% for individuals and corporates. So again, a straightforward step would be to remove these limits the way that other resource-constrained economies such as Vietnam have done to really unleash the full impact of these very powerful tax incentives. And it's not only the literature or economists or us who are saying that. 2/3 of the social delivery organizations that we surveyed believe that lack of good tax incentives is one of the main reasons that individual giving in Malaysia remains low. So this is one way, another way that Malaysia can move up the Doing Good Index and unleash greater resources for meeting social needs. Let's go on to the next slide, please. The final set of recommendations that we have on the next slide, please, are to do with government engagement, more direct engagement with the social sector. Shalini, can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. The government can engage with the social sector directly in two main ways. One is by giving funding to the social sector. And we see here that actually almost half of Malaysian nonprofits and social enterprises do receive government grants. But where Malaysia has is underutilizing the opportunity is in procurement, where the government contracts out social service delivery to the social sector. And this can be a win-win because it helps legitimize social service delivery from social sector organizations. It lets people know that the government is trusting the social sector. That's a great hint for other donors to jump on the bandwagon. And it helps social sector organizations build their capacity and grow, while allowing the government to leverage any comparative advantage or specialization that the social sector may have in delivering that social service to people. But it's a missed opportunity here because although in Asia, about a quarter of social delivery organizations are actually engaged in the government through procurement, in Malaysia, that's only about 11%. And these contracts also tend to be small. They make up on average only 3% of a social delivery organization's budget, which is half of the average in Asia. A third softer way in which the government can engage with the social sector, where Malaysia has some making up to do, is that around half of Malaysian nonprofits report never having been involved in policy making, not being involved in policy consultations. And we really encourage government, social sector engagement in policy consultations so that laws and regulations that do come into being are enabling and supportive for the sector. Let's go on to the next slide. So just before Ruth wraps up, there are a couple of other things I want to point out. There are a couple of positive trends that we should keep an eye on, and a challenge that I want to leave you with. The positive trend is that Malaysian social sector organizations do see a healthy dose of interaction and engagement and commitment by the corporate sector. We see this in funding. As you can see, most social sector organizations in Malaysia receive corporate funding, and it makes up about a quarter of their budget, which is substantial. But we see that companies are engaging in other ways. They are volunteering their time, they're volunteering their skills in accounting or legal services or marketing and communications, skills that the social sector usually is very heavily under-resourced in. We also see that the corporate sector is engaging with nonprofits and social enterprises by sitting on their boards. And this figure is not there on the slide, but we know that in an average 8-member board, almost half the members tend to have corporate experience, which is great. Another emerging trend, next slide please, is the rise of social enterprises, which are organizations that are using business operations to meet a social or environmental need. And here we see that most of the social delivery organizations that we surveyed are reporting that donors are showing more interest in social enterprises. Most of them see this as a positive development, because social enterprises offer yet another avenue, yet another actor where society's needs can be, that can help meet society's needs. But there are limited resources at the end of the day. So some of our respondents also expressed a concern that they may be competing, nonprofits and social enterprises may be competing for the same pool of resources, which actually makes the imperative for making that pool bigger even greater. We actually did a study at the end of last year on social enterprises in Asia, where we found that they're working in education, IT, and retail, that they're attracting founders from all age groups, and that about half the founders tend to be female as well, which is very encouraging. So there's a lot of, we'll be watching how social enterprises step up and step in to become yet another kind of social delivery organization in Asia. And with my final slide, the next slide, please, I just want to highlight a couple of challenges. Malaysia is by no means alone in these challenges, but they must be highlighted and discussed so that they can be addressed. One of them is the talent gap. There is a massive talent gap in the social sector, and it's not surprising when almost 80% of social delivery organizations report that there is a widespread perception that nonprofit staff should earn less than their for-profit counterparts. So this social tax that is levied on those of us who choose to work in the social sector might prevent us from building longer careers in the social sector and really investing in careers in the social sector. So that's one thing that we should watch out for. And the other one is that not enough in social investment and donation is going towards building the capacity of social sector organizations. Now, building their capacity, as we see more and more needs coming to the forefront thanks to COVID, and we see that there will need to be a great deal of rebuilding that would need to be done after COVID, whenever that after COVID era actually begins. We will also know that governments cannot do it alone, companies cannot do it alone, neither can the social sector. So one of the key ways to prepare for that is to make sure that there is enough funding that is flowing to build the capacity of social sector organizations who are doing incredible work in meeting social needs, in making sure that the vulnerable are not left behind, that they can continue doing that and do that at an even bigger scale. So with the next slide, I'll hand it back over to Ruth to wrap up.
Thank you, Mahesh. Can you just go to the next slide? Yeah. So this is a call to action, and it only really summarizes what Mevesh just told us, that governments, businesses, and the social sector all have a role to play in increasing accountability, transparency, and collaboration. I'm not the first to say that our societies are a three-legged stool and that we need all the sectors to work together to be able to have a secure place to sit and to live. So we encourage everyone to realize that they have a part. Our problems are very complex, and we need everyone to step up, and we need to work together. And these tools help us to improve each of our own actions, our own organizations, and our ability to work together. So thank you very much for letting us share. Thank you, My Harapan and Nama Foundation. And that's the end of our presentation.
You're muted, Nini.
Oh.
I forgot about that. Thank you, Ruth, and thank you, Mevesh, for giving us an overview of DGI on the whole, as well as sharing in greater detail about where Malaysia stands as far as Malaysia is concerned. So I think the great thing about the DGI is that we're always in competition with ourselves, with the country, and seeing how we can actually move to a much higher ranking, because it's something that needs to be done. If we don't do it, then obviously it does affect the entire world, as we have seen it time and again with the onset of COVID. So I think what I want to do immediately is, in the interest of time, I'd love to chat more about a lot of the things that you brought up, the call to action. But I feel that we need to also discuss, perhaps in with some of our, with all our speakers we have invited today. We have with us a couple of changes. Faris from Impact was unable to join us for a personal reason, as well as Chan from TFM. So we have lost our one and only government representative. So we'll probably have to make another session where we'll grill them separately to ensure that perhaps certain things we can move. And I think it's great timing too, as we're seeing a lot of changes now. So first, before that, I think I would want to be able to allow for if there are any questions from the floor regarding the overall index. Let me see. No. So if we don't, perhaps you can share with us what's very quickly what's next as far as the DGI index is concerned.
Well, we're obviously going to use it to bring about great change in Malaysia, with your help and the help of everyone listening. Our hope is to do this study every 2 years. I think it's really important to see the longitudinal aspect of it. That Malaysia went down is problematic, and there are fixes. Malaysian nonprofits should have tax exempt status. They should have boards, and we'd like to work with our partners there to help them to understand, and the government to understand, why that's important and why that further strengthens the sector, so that Malaysia can be much more effective and impactful as a whole. In 2022, which sounds like it's far away, especially this year seeming like it's taking forever, we are going to do a look back, and those questionnaires will actually go out early next year, where we're going to really look at the impact of COVID on the sector, and to really try to get a kind of an evidence-based pulse of how difficult things have become, where the opportunities are, how innovation has been fostered. There is the expression "desperate times call for desperate measures," and That desperation, though, can be a source of innovation and creativity. So we're seeing that happen, and we want to be able to document it. Mevish, do you want to add anything?
No, I just want to add something that is quite simple, but I think gets lost in some of in conversation, which is just how critical the social sector actually is in meeting social needs. It is, as Ruth said, the third leg of the three-legged stool. And part of the reason that we want to continue doing the Doing Good Index is to highlight that role. So the next version will be COVID themed, but we will hopefully also be able to show what a crucial role the social sector kept playing through that. Recently, someone asked us in a panel discussion, what is the social sector doing differently because of COVID? And our answer was, well, first of all, it is doing what it has always done, which is meet needs in education, look after the vulnerable who no one else is looking after, make sure that people are not being left behind. And on top of that, COVID is placing an even greater responsibility on the social sector. So we hope with the Doing Good Index to keep highlighting that, to make sure the spotlight doesn't shift away from a sector that is traditionally overlooked.
I think it has the importance of the third sector has become prominent now as a result of the COVID. So I feel that that's quite the silver lining. And in Malaysia, I feel that they were the first frontliners who really put all their efforts, despite the lack in resources, to ensure that the vulnerable and the marginalized have not been forgotten. So I feel that I feel that there's increased recognition as to how they can be part of the conversation. When you talk about inclusion in policies and how they can also be, whether they're small or big, they can be included and should be included even more so now. I think my team has asked that we actually go on and proceed with the next thing in the agenda, which is the panel discussion. So I'd like to invite all our panel speakers, except for the only two gentlemen that we invited. So it's going to be an all-female girl band. So that's usually not the case. So it's quite a nice change. I'd like to invite, yes, please introduce Lee Ying from Teach for Malaysia, who is replacing Mr. Chan, the CEO. I would also like to immediately call upon Elaine Lokman, who is the co-founder and director of Mata Plus, and inshallah will be able to share about her views on crowdfunding and other possible sources of income or sources of financing that could prove useful to SDOs, as we're seeing how we need to move away from perhaps looking into beyond individual charitable giving. And also, gosh, I can't remember. Yeah, so that's 1, 2, 3, that's 5 of us. And Farida, who is from Coffee for Good. And she was also a respondent in our survey for the past 2 years, if I'm not mistaken. So thank you for also your support and being able to join us in perhaps understanding more viewpoints about the index and how we can move forward in ensuring that we can go up the scale and become a lot better than we are at this point in time. So the first thing that I would like to address is, the Mevesh mentioned the fact that there are, I think, in part, a lot of foundations are coming in, seeing a lack of support by bonus towards programs which are focusing on capacity development, capacity building of the SEOs. And I think this has some influence on even governance and even in ensuring that there is a board, because they may not necessarily know what they know, right? So what they don't know, sorry. So I'd like to ask, right, based on particularly their opinions of the SDOs here, from TFM and Coffee for Good. How do you think corporates now, as it stands, aside from regulations and fiscal policies that will come in, inshallah, by the government, how do you think corporates, funders, and philanthropists can develop some interest in SDOs, in developing their capacity, their capacity as well as their capability, especially during these times where perhaps a lot of their efforts are directed towards combating the COVID-19 pandemic? So I'd like to first open the floor to our first two SDOs, Farida as well as Lee from Teach for Malaysia.
Should I start?
Yes, sure. Go ahead, Farida.
Assalamualaikum. I'm Farida from Coffee for Good. Okay, your question is how corporates and funders, philanthropists can help us during this COVID-19 critical times. So, Alhamdulillah, this is our 5th year since founded in 2015, and positive side of COVID is that people start noticing us, especially the corporates, because I think is how we quickly pivot our business, and also first of all, I think because those corporations, those companies who support us during this time found out about us before COVID. So for me, it is important for corporates, funders, philanthropists to at least know who are the social enterprise or the NGOs in the country. So at least when they are aware about us, so they know how to help us. Because for 2 years back, we were just a small cafe and also hidden in Damansara. But luckily, during a event also by Maharapan, Hong Leong Bank founded us, and we have been also the recipient of their CSR. And past 2 years, they have been helping us through setting up a kiosk where we can generate more income, and also events through catering, which when they know about us, they know how to help. So I guess that is the main problem about being a small company, because people are not aware about our existence. So it's not that they do not want to help, but we are not not visible. So I guess how they can help is first of all, we need to be we need to be out there. We need the exposure, and luckily the COVID has helped us to achieve this. And also when these corporates, especially they know who to look for. For example, if they're looking for corporate gifts, they know, for example, Suri, and for food, they know where to find maybe Food Bite, and for coffee, they know where to find Coffee for Good. So, and also there should be a listing of social enterprise and NGOs, like e-commerce platform, where list of existing social enterprise, so corporates know where to find them. Maybe Lee can add.
Yeah. Hi, thanks, Farida. Thanks, Mavesh and Mimi and Ruth earlier. I think coming back to the question, how can corporates, we see the shift in supporting COVID-19 efforts, and how can we bring back to supporting capacity building? I think what we have been focusing on as an organization, like Teach for Malaysia, we anchor ourselves in leadership development, and also leadership development and also talent development. So naturally, or I guess we're lucky in a way that that is our core operations and core mission, and how we have been bringing our partners or new people to come in and still support in capacity building is to really understand what we are currently doing in developing our students, our talent, young talent. So we invite them to join us to see the impact of development, and we also bring them close by to share with them. Especially during COVID, there are so many problems that throwing us off. Like we treat them as part of our advisors, one of us. So when they come and see what are the problems that we are facing, then they would be able to actually draw the connections that actually there is a lot of capacity building that's needed in the organization. There are a lot of skill sets that need to be developed. So I would say ultimately, one, keeping them close by, treat them as one of us rather than one of them. And when you have problems, don't be afraid to actually share with them what are the challenges that we are facing. And you might not know that they would, because of that journey, because of that kind of relationship, they built that knowledge. So I'll just keep it short for that end, and I'll pass it back to Nini.
Thank you for sharing. It's interesting because you have a perspective from an SE which had started 5 years ago and is relatively quite small, Farida. Teach from Malaysia is much bigger by scale, but not to say that it's not as impactful. Both serve a purpose, but it's interesting again to see how at the end is about close engagement, and based on the results of the index, the key findings was there is engagement. How do we, after that, perhaps from engagement in volunteering, they can be engaged even in the aspects of governance, I feel, which is where we're also lacking in ensuring that there is a body that can not necessarily just provide us with advice, but mentoring and the sort of perhaps expertise that is required by all the SDOs, if it's anything, if the index is anything to go by. But I'm interested to find out whether Elaine has any thoughts on this, and whether or not there are means of facilitating this process, because when you talk about even grant making or in main or CSR money, it does not necessarily, it never does goes into capacity development. So what are your viewpoints?
Yeah, I think, thank you for the invitation today, and it's very interesting because I just want to talk a little bit about about this. It's interesting that I'm in this session today because tomorrow I'm actually having a session with the Minister of Finance to talk about SRI, right? And this is at the Securities Commission, and I think the SC has been looking at looking at how they can actually create a more vibrant capital market specifically for impact investment, right? And the way we are looking at impact investing is really into these type of entities, I would say. So before I continue, I just wanted to understand specifically with the report, Mavish, the survey, was it done across NGOs, social enterprise, and foundations?
Thank you. That's a great question. Yes, and that's why we end up using some of these terms interchangeably. What we focus on, our respondent is actually a social delivery organization. So we don't let that be boxed in by the type of that organization. It can be a non-profit, it can be a for-profit. And in fact, I think 1 in 4 of all respondents from Malaysia were actually for-profit social delivery organizations. And even those that identified themselves as non-profit, half of them were generating some revenue. So because this field is in flux, there are many new kinds of actors and ways coming up to innovate and deliver social services. We did not box ourselves in by organization type. All that matters to us is that the organization be delivering a social service.
Yeah, thank you for that. Because that's interesting, because you say that there's quite a number sprouting up that's for profit, right? And to me, this comes where the issue about talent and capacity building. I mean, in the last 5 years of me focusing on crowdfunding, and what I do is, my platform actually is a regulated equity crowdfunding platform, and we have actually successfully funded one social enterprise, and it has successfully exited as well, because it was acquired by another bigger impact company. So I think what we've been, our observation is, because it's not just social enterprises that approach us, but also NGOs as well as foundations, looking at fundraising, and this is clearly a huge challenge. And what we glaringly observe, is that there's lack of a business plan for each of these entities. Yeah, I mean, no doubt, whether you're an NGO or a foundation, and especially with a social enterprise, because it is for profit, it is treated as a business. A plan, a business plan, is very, very important, because at the end of the day, with that plan, you know what you want to do with your business or the organization, and there will be activities, right, or events or initiatives that's coming out from the organization. And obviously there needs to be funds, right? And it's not just funds to support the activities, but also funds that's needed for working capital, right? So there needs to be a clear strategy on how you need to fundraise, be it, is it through, looking at CSR funds, or is it crowdfunding, and to ensure sustainability as well, because fundraising is very, very tiring. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I see Ling and nodding there. It's hard, because I mean, typically, like, for example, we've come across foundations that, initially they have an initial fund there, which is provided by the trustees, right? But eventually it will run out if you don't have a sustainable funding model, for the lack of a better word, right? Or even business model.
I'd like to answer that, if you wouldn't mind. First of all, any organization needs a business plan, and it's a misnomer to think that a nonprofit doesn't need one, because a nonprofit at the end of the day is a business. It needs to raise enough money, it needs to pay its employees, it needs to pay rent. So you need to have a plan, as you said, in order to do that. One thing that's really lacking is the skills, whether they're in the nonprofit sector or the social enterprise, to put together a coherent business plan. There are skill sets involved in doing a good job. Second, I would say that because it takes 2 years for a nonprofit to achieve tax-exempt status in Malaysia, there's actually a built-in structural incentive for an organization to become a social enterprise vis-a-vis a nonprofit. Because, right, so that's a societal question. Are organizations becoming social enterprise because there's such a heavy burden to become a nonprofit, or are they becoming a social enterprise because they actually think that they have a business idea that makes them self-sustaining over time? And I would say the jury is out on answering that question for many organizations in Malaysia. So I think that the good news is that corporations are engaged. They do have financial forecasting, they do have business strategy acumen, they do have organizational strategy experience, and those really need to be put into place for both the nonprofits and the social enterprises.
Yeah, I just want to say one last point before we move on. So we have been looking at this space because we have, as a company, we have quite a bit of interest, because we see it as a big problem in Malaysia. for NGOs, foundations, and social enterprise risk funds. What's interesting is that in the last couple of weeks, the Magic is one of the government agency has actually announced a matching grant. And this is a matching grant for social enterprises or NGOs or foundations who manage to fundraise through crowdfunding. And that's through 6 crowdfunding platforms, right? And they match one-on-one. So they see it as a clear, and why this is important. And I think that's why Securities Commission has also raised this. But I think as a company, we've come up with new innovative models using the tokenization concept. And I shall not dwell on it because it can take a bit of time. But I think what needs to be seen is that the tokenization model actually looks at an alternative way of recognizing contributions in the sector rather than just the fiat money. So we're looking at, I don't like to use the word cryptocurrency, but for the lack of an alternative word on tokens, as the crypto economy can actually really support this industry and take it to the next level. Well, we can discuss it maybe the next time I meet any one of you. But this is something that we've proposed to the government as well. But I think they've kind of like put it in the back burner because they don't understand it, So it's something that I think should be seriously looked at because it also covers, I think one of you mentioned about reporting, right? And the lack of a governing body. And with crowdfunding and the token economy, you can actually get even the crowd to actually do their role in terms of auditing the activity, or actually auditing to say that, yes, this organization is actually a legit entity that actually does good. Because many times it's just a one-way street, you get a report, but you don't know, is that real? Because reports are always nice and good because it's coming out from that particular organization. So who does the audit of that report, and is there another third-party audit? So I should just end there, and we can discuss something else later. Thank you. Nini?
So I'll be coming in and out, but I like how the discussion is flowing, because at the end of the day, we needed to go into the issue of what are the alternatives to existing, pure donor models. So, Elaine touched on a couple of subjects, I feel, which is the fact that at the end of the day, irrespective of whether or not there are policies in place or incentives in place, or issues of enforcing of governance is in place by the government, that we can self-regulate as an industry. And I feel that I think this is the right time to actually start looking inwards and seeing how we can actually move the needle a little bit further, irrespective of whatever that the government is proposing. Because when you go through the proposal, it takes another 2 years, 3 years, which is more than the existing registration for tax incentives in itself. So I think you've touched on certain things as well. We talk about finance, you talk about, but I also want to be able to hear from the opinion from Coffee for Good as well as Teach from Malaysia as to how your organizations have, what are the anecdotes as far as your organizations are concerned when it comes to financing and getting access to other means beyond donation. Ying, do you want to start this?
Sure. Can I clarify the question again? So what is
because I mean we touched on the issue of financing, right? And in the index right now is we're seeing that we are not that a lot of the SDOs are the majority of them are relying on individual donations. And I think there's a lot of interest to see how there are other alternatives which may also include government procurement. So what has been your strategies as far as looking into the different channels of getting funding?
Sure. Okay. Thank you. So I think for Malaysia, I guess we are a bit different in that sense. Actually, majority of our fundings come from the corporate sector. In the past few years, we have been trying to diversify to public funding. So trying to reach out to individual donations to donate during it a month or that recurring donations method. And we have also been going into crowdfunding platforms, trying to encourage our movement, people that are our supporters to actually to fundraise while they have different events and all, and support them in their fundraising activities through different crowdfunding platforms. Yeah, we have. Oh, do I need to repeat? Could you hear me just now? Okay. Okay, so I don't need to repeat. Okay, yeah. So that's how we have been going into. I think that's a little different, and that means we have also been trying to understand much more what our corporate donors are interested in, and finding that fine balance between their interests and activities. Just now, in the presentation, there were mentions that Malaysia. The good sign is corporates are interested in getting involved and they want their employees to get involved. And actually, a lot of people are hungry to be involved in doing good. So it's really thinking and changing the mindset. Like, how can we bridge that desire and with what is on the ground and catering that. Yep, I'll stop there.
Okay, as for Coffee for
Thank
Good,
you.
for the when we started, we run a kiosk and like a semi-permanent setup, and our income is generally from the sales of our coffee. But after a few years, then we noticed that actually most of our revenues come from corporates and also events, big events, also for government. So for the last 2 years, when we noticed this, so we have changed our target market to corporates and also government. So we provide our coffee caterings, and then we do our coffee kiosk setup for big events for corporates. So we have been funding our own social enterprise, and also by doing that, we also reduce our overhead. So we have no rentals to pay, and our beneficiaries is also our employees. So we make sure that they are fairly paid based on the hours that they spend with us. So lesser overhead, and we make more with a better target market. So that's how we have been surviving for the past few years.
Okay. Yes. So yes, it's interesting to know, especially when it comes to I mean, for-profit or SDOs, which have a revenue channel, that I feel with a product and service, then obviously it's perhaps easier to access government procurement. And I have to acknowledge that at the end of the day, there are efforts by the government to ensure that at least with the listing of all the SDOs, for now is a social enterprise, a list of all those who may be able to provide products and services can also be first more of a green lane, or be able to government agencies can actually be aware of their existence. So but I think what I can do is also ask something that's got to do with funding, which was posed by Zahida Azman about crowdfunding, and maybe perhaps any one of you, if you know of if there are any studies on the potential of crowdfunding platforms in Asia within perhaps the context of SDOs. Yes, Ruth.
I don't know of studies, but I know of essentially overviews. So maybe not scientific studies, two things about crowdfunding. One is those things that get funded tend to be emotional. So it's much easier to raise money for hungry children or needy widows or some kind of issue or project that really pulls on your heartstrings than for capacity building or institutional or God forbid research, which is what CAPS does. So those kinds of projects that really speak about individual hardship of people and families and children find it easier to crowdfund. Secondly, it's much easier to crowdfund in those places where people really trust payment through your phone. Because then it's if the crowdfunding can be just done while you're paying for something else or an additional click and you're okay paying through your phone, then it's much more of a turnkey. And I apologize, I'm not as familiar with what's available in Malaysia in terms of payment through the phone. We did do a little bit of a study comparing Hong Kong and China. China, everybody pays through their phone. So when Tencent and Alibaba try to raise money, there's a lot of trust there. In Hong Kong, people don't pay through their phone, and so it's much harder to fundraise accordingly. That's all. Should I answer this question? DGI fine. It's a big,
yes. Yes.
Well, it's why we did the Doing Good Index, to benefit the social sector. So I think that if the nonprofits and social enterprise, if the social sector organizations, the social delivery organizations, the corporates, and the government take the findings and call to action that we put forward, it will help strengthen the social sector as a whole and allow for greater collaboration across the different parts of society. You want to add to that, Mevesh?
No, I think that's a great summary of what we can do. I was just going to add that we would like to hear from you. How do you think the Doing Good Index can benefit the social sector in Malaysia? It's a 200-page tome, not to scare you guys off. And there's a lot in there that we have not been able to discuss today. So, there are different aspects and angles that can be picked up according to what sector you're in or what you want to move the needle on. But I actually wanted to go back, Nini, if that's okay, to something that Elaine was talking about, funding and fundraising. And it's interesting. I mean, Malaysia is really one of the few economies in the Doing Good Index where there is a lot of mixed representation among social delivery organizations. There are social enterprises, there are nonprofits, there are organizations that are in between the two, or maybe moving towards one or moving towards the other. So Malaysia actually sees a lot of churn and is seeing a lot of movement in the type of social delivery organization. And although we did not look at Malaysia specifically for a social enterprise and impact investment study, which is available on our website for free on caps.org, we did look at 6 other Asian economies, including some of Malaysia's neighbors. And one of our most interesting findings was the absolutely critical role that philanthropy plays even in the social entrepreneurship ecosystem. So, thinking about funding, the idea that philanthropy is for nonprofits only is not true. It's kind of the backbone of startup funding for social enterprises. And in fact, the social enterprises that we surveyed really prefer it to other kinds of fundraising at the very beginning. It's a kind of angel investment for them that allows them to go back to what you were saying, Elaine, craft a business plan, to maybe pivot it if it's not working, to have some room to breathe, maybe fail and restart again. So there's a lot of demand for philanthropy, and there's a role that philanthropy is playing at kind of the base of the pyramid in social enterprises, not just nonprofits. The other thing I wanted to say was that in that study, we also speak to a broader and more mixed role for philanthropists as well as for investors. So for philanthropists, we urge them to not only look to supporting non-traditional non-profits, but also social enterprises or intermediaries, incubators and accelerators that are trying to build the capacity of these social enterprises, or maybe even platforms like yours, Elaine, which are trying to bridge the funding gap between investors and social enterprises. So we speak to a broader role, and maybe Malaysia would be a great place to experiment with that, because there's so much diversity in the nature of social delivery organizations. But the second type of donor that we speak to is the impact investor. We know that Asia gets very little impact investment. Only about 16 or 17% of global impact investment actually flows to Asia. This is mostly from outside Asia. How much is homegrown? It seems to be very little. We don't really have reliable figures for that. And so we urge Asian impact investors to also broaden their approach and to not only consider investing in investment-ready social enterprises, do equity investments, but also consider participating in where there's a big gap, which is in the debt market. It's very hard for social enterprises to access loans. So that's something that we urge impact investors to do. Take a portfolio approach to investment, as they would do with their commercial investments. So don't only look at one kind of instrument, maybe even look at recoverable grants going out to social enterprises. So that's just what I wanted to add, that there's diversity and growth in not only social delivery organizations, but the approach that philanthropists can take to this sector and the approach that impact investors can take.
Can I say something just to add to what you've just said? Because I think one of the key challenges, and we've highlighted this to the Securities Commission, and I think Nini, we've talked about this, is the word social enterprise itself. We urge that to be changed to impact enterprises, because I've met investors, right, when they hear social enterprise, oh, it's as good as an NGO, our money will be gone, we won't get our returns. They have that mindset, so it's a perception issue. That's number one. And number two, I truly feel that the crowd will be a much better pool to support social enterprises or NGOs or foundations, when you talk about social initiatives, social related initiatives. And I'll give you a very good example, which is the company that we help fundraise. They're called Scholar Fund, and they actually help underserved students, university students, to raise scholarships. Yeah, and they've been getting accolades everywhere, in terms of their business and so on. They won awards, this and that. And over 12 months, right, they talked to more than 100 angel investors and VCs, and they got zero money. Okay, and when we met them and we said to them, you know why? Because these guys, they're looking at maximizing profits, returns. And you're right to say that we do not have an active impact or impact VC community in Asia, right? It's unlike the West, because impact investing in the West is much more mainstream, compared to Asia. So they raised their money, 300,000 ringgit, through the crowd, and they had very, very nice investments from 10 ringgit up to 50,000. There were three people who, three investors invested 50,000, and there were 10 ringgit, 1,000, 500, 200, 20,000, 30,000. So it was truly inclusive. It was a very, very nice fundraising campaign. So it is, like you say, it is not mainstream. We're trying to get people to understand that this is a need, and whilst there's donors, but there's also potential investors, right? But how do we get them to see that, when you invest in an impact and in impact enterprises, it's a balance of returns and impact to whatever they're doing. So it's both the social return as well as the financial return. So yeah, and we're still continuing.
Absolutely. No, that's great, and it's one of the things again that we point to. We ask investors to look at a composite return. What is their expectation of social and financial return? And maybe they have a bigger appetite for social return in a health investment, but a bigger appetite for financial return in an agri-tech investment. So, but it's important for them to be purposeful about it and think about this as a combined return. But Elaine, I think the perception issue that you're pointing to is absolutely a massive, widespread, and very nefarious one in this space. I wish that, instead of saying, oh, this giving money to a social enterprise is like giving money to a nonprofit, it might disappear. Instead of that, I wish they would say it's like giving money to any startup. 90%, more than 90% of startups fail. So, but it's interesting that the lens that is used is, oh, if we lose money, it's because it's like a nonprofit. And there is not enough of this recognition that there is a dual burden on social enterprises and a dual cost to their failure. The dual burden is that they are trying to make meeting a social need commercially sustainable and feasible. It's hard to make anything commercially sustainable, let alone meeting a social need. And the dual cost of failure is that social need does not get met and the business does not succeed. So it's all the more important that this perception be challenged. And our data shows that this perception is not borne out. In fact, we looked at mostly early stage social enterprises across 5 countries plus Hong Kong. We found that even at the early stage, half of them were profitable already. And more than 90% had the intention and the plan to become profitable in the near future. So on so many levels, this perception needs to be challenged. And we have some evidence and data to challenge it.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a very interesting question, which I feel it has partly answered one question about what is a social enterprise, and how is it that social enterprises sometimes end up just being very for-profit driven organizations, if I understand it correctly. So I think at the end of the day, a social enterprise is a business, and as rightly mentioned by Mavesh, they have to be able to consider the double burden of the failures, and I feel that the successes can also multiplied by a lot more than the potential failures. I won't dwell on at the end of the day, there is a lot of accreditation that is coming in with the idea of what social enterprises are, and the fact that not-for-profits are trying to also come up with their own business plans is really about how do we professionalize and empower these NGOs to keep continuing to do good, so that the doing good never dies, but more sustainably for a much longer time than whatever that perhaps there's so many lemons that's thrown at us at this point in time, maybe as a result of our own failure to recognize the social consequences of a lot of our actions, both social and environmental. I think, but we were supposed to dive right into the idea of, how can SDOs reap from the benefit from a BOG, a Board of Governance. But I think we'll move that to some other time, because I really want to be able to go through this discussion more meaningfully and more deeply. But I would want to, someone asked us, so a lot of the emphasis was placed on tax, fiscal policies, regulations. It sounds as if this government does not place an importance in providing all this, does this mean that doing good will die? And there is some efforts, of course, at grassroots level to overcome this. But what's your opinion on that, seeing that we're going through turbulent times?
Can I just say it first? If you ask me, COVID-19, right? The pandemic really proved that it will never die. If you look at how Malaysians, and not just when you talk about Malaysians, you're talking about individuals and corporates or even businesses, right? They band together and help everyone, in whatever way, in various areas, whether supporting the frontliners or even those who lost jobs and had no food to eat and whatever else, But having said that, you touch on a nice point, Nini, on tax incentives and fiscal policies. And this is where my point is earlier, because we need to look at alternative ways of recognition, recognizing donors or investors in this space. And this is where we've been talking about alternative tools, and some of the things that we mentioned to the government why not, right? The donors get tokens, and these tokens can be redeemed by, okay, if you want to renew your driving license or whatever, you can get, a green lane because you actually do good. You did a lot of good, so you get do good points, whatever. It's like it's the same as you get a lot of points when you go shopping or whatever, So it's similar, but it can go beyond that. So I think the government really needs to look at alternative models on how you can encourage, people to support, and the concept of loose change, right? So if you have e-wallets, when you talk about the crowd coming together, even if you contribute 10 cents, but if the whole of the Malaysian population contribute 10 cents, that's a lot of money, So that's where technology can also blend in with new concepts and ideas. Anyway, that's my 2 cents worth.
Ruth, were you going to say something on the role of government, or?
Yeah. Do I want? Okay. Well, I actually challenged the question. First of all, the Doing Good Index is primarily a policy study, so we do look at the role of government. But I think I want to just reemphasize that everybody has a role to play here. And many nonprofits and social enterprise come and they say, oh, how can we raise money? And the answer that I often say and that we say is, you better tell your story better. You better have a great website. You better help people to understand that by funding you, it's money well spent, that you're having an impact, even if it doesn't have any monetary value. If you're working with girls and you're educating them, great. Tell the story well. So, or you're working with disabled people and you're really helping them to lead fruitful lives, tell the story well. So I think that it is true that nonprofits and social enterprises can do a lot more to tell their story, to be accountable, to show their impact, and to help them be a place that people trust giving money to, even if there's not a financial return. In terms of government, regulations and tax incentives do matter. And we have to get to the point where we're working more collaboratively across the sectors, not staying in our own silos. And in order to do that, we have to build trust and we have to create these mechanisms where you work with, government works with nonprofits, government works with companies, companies work with nonprofits, etc.
Any views from our SDOs? Sorry.
You want any views on the role of government, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the views is, if government is, like you rightly mentioned, that it is important to have them involved in ensuring that the incentives so that we can really look into unlocking the capital, right? But I'm just saying that, what if, right, in the circumstances where governments do not take on that role to incentivize, I'm just speculating. So
well, you know what, Nini? I mean, truthfully, in a lot of countries where government hasn't taken on enough of a role, it is the social sector that's stepping in. And look, the most extreme example is Bangladesh, where two nonprofits, Grameen and BRAC, in effect have taken over the role of government. So we can all look at circumstances where government hasn't stepped up, and that provides the reason and the opportunity for social delivery organizations to step in. So I don't think that SDOs have ever waited for government to give them a raison d'etre, a reason to exist and flourish. It's just that government can make all of our lives a lot easier or harder.
I get you. Yeah. So I think that's where we only have 5 minutes left, and it's really about stressing, and emphasizing the fact that there's a lot that we can do as well within the third sector, and that while we don't even have a representation enough from that side where it matters when we talk about incentives and regulations and so on and so forth. So it's interesting to see how things are going to develop, though, with tomorrow's meeting with the Ministry of Finance, and seeing how they can actually look into SRIs. So whether or not I feel that there's a lot of efforts, and I hope that we won't stop even if the government was to change. But I'd like to.
Can I add one thing, Nini? I think there's really great experimentation happening around the world and in Malaysia on using money and using financing new and innovative ways to finance. And Islamic finance lends itself to impact investing in social enterprise in a big way. And I know that's true at a conceptual level. We just need to move it to a real level, because there's some natural alignment there, so that Malaysia theoretically could be leading the charge in this regard, because of the existence of Islamic finance.
Ruth, I just want to add, I think, we've been talking to the Islamic Capital Markets team as well in SD, and they're also looking at some innovative ways, like the concept of wakaf.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a natural.
Absolutely. And even crowdfunding, right? Crowdfunding, it is Islamic, in that sense. Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway.
Right. Yeah. So sorry. We only have 3 minutes left. So I'm looking at the clock. I would love. Yes, it's all right. I would love to have this. Continue on with the
2-hour session.
we need more, obviously. So I will be calling on you guys to give in additional inputs if you can, because it's so extensive. The index covers a lot of areas. But I think in these last 3 minutes, I would like to make you guys close it, and maybe you can actually, the team can take me out. But what would be your pitch to ensuring that Malaysia keeps very healthy as the social third sector? What would be your last words? Oh dear. So maybe just. Yes, Farida, what would you say? What would be your message to the audience?
As a social enterprise, with or without any assistance, if you believe in what you do and what you do is doing right and being good, just keep on going.
Okay. Yes. I'll leave caps for the best for last. Yes, Li Ying.
Yeah, I think similar. Other than really concentrating on what we do best, but also just now there was a comment on we need to tell our story better as nonprofits or foundations or organizations. Look, how do we invite others to understand our lens? How do we invite others to see what we see as an urgent problem, and invite them to be part of this movement together? So it is a lot of capacity building in that sense, and making sure that we don't slack also in that way. We want to be run like a business, although we are a nonprofit, and finding ways to upscale ourselves to be competitive in that end. Yeah, so those are my long phrase. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Elaine.
Yeah. I think for me is alternative financing with like crowdfunding is really something that I believe that NGOs, impact businesses and foundations, or impact entities, I want to call them, should seriously look at. And if you consider that, then the important thing is band your communities together, because people who support you will typically be also the ones to help with the funding, and the beauty of leveraging on your crowd or on your supporters. Every little cent counts, and it's all about volume, right? And I would like to also echo what Ling was saying just now. Telling better stories helps. Storytelling is important, and continuously engage with your community. Very, very important, because once they provide the contribution, they would want to know what is happening, how have you progressed. And if they get that, they will continuously support you over and over again. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not
I'll just add, I think something, Nini, that the social sector has known for a long time, which is that problems are multifaceted, and so do solutions need to be. It's something that nonprofits and social enterprises know, because they run up against things they cannot control or change, and they need either resources, maybe from the private sector, or they need better regulations from the government sector. And what I think COVID has done is it's really shown a spotlight on this, that problems are multifaceted, and no single entity, no single sector can deal with them alone. And I would urge the social sector to really step up and highlight its role in solving these issues. Shout out your stories from rooftops. Be more like companies. Tell everyone what great work you are doing, and how so much of this progress cannot be made without your active participation. So those would be my parting words.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all the speakers for joining me on this very quick. It feels so as if time flew on the DGI and how it can help us become better as not-for-profits. So I will need to pass this back to Rosa, who will take the floor and close this session.
Okay. Hi, I'm back. Thank you, Nini. We have come to the end of our event today. It has been a wonderful day with all of you. I believe all the informations given are very insightful. Okay, thanks. Thank you once again for making time to attend this event. Allow me to take this opportunity to thank our moderator, our both wonderful interpreters, and definitely our panelists once again. We look forward to strengthening our partnership and future collaboration for success via this meaningful engagement. Last but not least, thank you very much to My Harapan team for this wonderful and meaningful engagement. Thank you very much to Nama Talk team members from Nama Foundation. And then, all right, before I go, don't forget to follow us via Nama Foundation Facebook and Instagram, and also follow My Harapan Facebook and any social media that they have. Till we meet again, and please be safe. Thank you. Oh, don't forget to email, sorry, just hang on a second. Email the question to talk@myharapan.org. All right, till we meet again. Bye-bye. Assalamualaikum.